Good evening. You're watching UTV Live at 6 on Tuesday, September the 23rd. It was billed as an historic day. For the first time in 3/4 of a century, Unionists and Sinn Féin sat across the table from each other. The Unionists' first move was to try and have Sinn Féin thrown out, but the government judgment on that indictment will not be made until tomorrow. Our political correspondent, Ken Reid, has been following today's developments at Stormont, and we'll hear from him shortly. We'll also be hearing from the dissident Ulster Unionist, who has been strongly critical of his party's going into talks at all. William Thompson, the MP for West Tyrone, talks to us in a few minutes. The Ulster Unionist Party and Sinn Féin sat in the same conference room for the first time in 75 years at Stormont today. A move by David Trimble to have Sinn Féin thrown out of the talks is being considered by the British and Irish governments. Our political correspondent Ken Reid now reports from Stormont.
Sinn Féin arrived at Stormont knowing they faced an indictment to have them thrown out of the talks. Outside, long-standing enemies waited for their turn at the microphone. But significantly, David Trimble entered Castle Buildings, saying nothing to the waiting media. The government, at least, was hopeful today was going to be one which would make progress.
All I'd like to say is that today is another step forward in the process that I hope and we aim to move towards substantive negotiations as soon as possible, and today is another step in that direction.
Shortly after 2 o'clock, Ken McGuinness outlined the Ulster Unionist case against Sinn Féin. An hour later, David Trimble led his talks delegation out through the gates of Castle Buildings to outline that case to the waiting media. The Unionists claim that inside the conference room, with the DUP and UK Unionist seats empty, they refused to look at Sinn Féin.
And we've said to the Secretary of State and called upon her to justify her decision to bring to the table of democracy those that have been responsible for murder and iniquitous crimes for which they have not paid their debt to society.
The Unionist leader also had strong words for the government.
The people on trial today are not just Sinn Féin, but also the Labour Party and the Labour government. That's what's on trial today. As to whether that government has any genuine commitment to democracy and whether it's allowing itself to be gulled along, that is an issue which we will want to hear the answer over the days and weeks to come.
The Unionists deny there was a contradiction between their attitudes towards Sinn Féin and the Loyalists.
Today we are dealing with the obscenity of the IRA, unreconstructed terrorists at the table of democracy. Now that is somewhat different from having people who admit that they represent loyalist paramilitaries who have themselves said, we are remorseful for what has happened in the past and we will never again engage in first strike violence.
Gerry Adams gives Sinn Féin's response to the day's events.
One view is that this is David Trimble's ticket in the talks and we should tolerate it, and we do. And the other view is that it's highly provocative, the way he behaves. And I think it's actually a mixture of both. This was heralded as the great confrontation, the great showdown, the great challenging of Sinn Féin. And the leaders of unionism come into the room, made a submission, and then scampered out of the room to talk to the media.
Others give their reaction.
Well, we've had our sham fight and our theatricals for today, so now I hope that everyone can concentrate their minds and get down to the real issues of trying to negotiate a meaningful settlement for the people of Northern Ireland.
Our objective is to ensure that we reach an agreement that will ensure that we live together in peace and harmony, and that the gun will be taken forever out of our politics.
The government is expected to give its decision on the Ulster Unionist complaint against Sinn Féin at tomorrow afternoon's plenary session. This is Ken Reid for UTV Live at Stormont.
Well, now, one man not convinced that the Ulster Unionists should be there at all is the MP for West Tyrone, William Thompson. He's an Ulster Unionist and is strongly critical of his own party's stance. He joins us now. Mr. Thompson, that was fighting talk there from David Trimble. Has anything happened today to make you change your mind?
No, I have been a member of the Ulster Unionist Party now for almost 30 years. And I never really thought the day would arrive when members of our party would sit down with those who are in effect terrorists. I think that's a grave mistake, and I think that it'll rebound to the harm of our party.
You're out of line with the rest of the party on this, though, aren't you?
Well, I'm not so sure of that. I think when people begin to see what's really happening, then I think that there will be a groundswell of opposition to it. And indeed, the many phone calls which I receive are very much in support of the stance I take.
But you're the one who is being vocal. Nobody else is coming out as strongly as you are. Would it not be an idea to try and sort out your differences out of the glare of publicity, rather than doing it like this?
Well, I think there comes times when one has to reveal their true feelings and what they really think. Over the past few months, I have been watching the changes that have been taking place. I've been watching the policies as they have emerged. I have stayed silent, though many times I haven't agreed with them. But I have seen recently that there was a determination to get into these talks, and I don't agree with it, and therefore I'm making my view known as an elected member of Parliament, which I believe I should do.
It's very easy for you to say what you've just said, but try and put yourself in David Trimble's shoes, where he's got to actually take the whole party with him. Your comments aren't helping.
Well, after all, David Trimble, as leader of the party, he's got to, in fact, view the whole party and all the views of the party, and then he's got to make his decision.
Okay, so what's the alternative then? What's the alternative?
The alternative to talks?
Yes.
I don't believe that there's anything to be gained by the Unionist Party sitting in talks with Sinn Féin.
Well, in that case, then, what happens is...
Because we are going to have to make all the concessions. Nobody else there can make concessions. We've got to make the concessions.
But if you're not in there
and
fighting...
I don't believe that we should be making concessions to terrorism. I believe in a democracy. We should, in fact, not ever talk to terrorists.
But if you aren't in there fighting the corner for the Ulster Unionist Party, then what's going to happen is that the governments are going to make decisions over your head and you'll have no say at all.
Well, I don't believe that, but let me say this. I don't believe that we are fighting very well for the Unionist Party, because let's take what we have been doing. We have been arguing for decommissioning. We have lost that argument.
Would you say
we have, in fact, today been arguing that Sinn Féin should be put out of talks. We're going to lose that argument. Don't tell me that we're arguing from a strong point of view.
Would you sit more comfortably in the DUP, do you think?
Absolutely not. I've always been an Ulster Unionist.
But the DUP want to stay out.
Well, that's their problem, that's not mine.
Yes, but you want to stay out as well.
Yeah, well, I believe we should keep talking, but I don't believe we should ever negotiate with Sinn Féin.
Is this a matter that you would consider resigning over?
Obviously, I will have to consider my position. If these talks go on and we get deeply involved in them and concessions are beginning to be made, then obviously I will have to consider my position.
Which means that you may well be leaving the Ulster Unionist Party.
Well, I have made no decisions on that. I've been an Ulster Unionist for many, many years. I've been a strong supporter of the Unionist Party. I have been in the Ulster Unionist Party even before the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party today was in it. I don't take decisions like that easily, but I have principles, things I believe in, and I believe there comes a time when you have to stand up for them. I believe that we, as an Ulster Unionist Party, a democratic party, should never get involved with contacts or with negotiations with terrorists, and that includes loyalists as well as Republicans.
We leave it there for now. Thank you very much indeed. Unionist leader David Trimble is with me now. Before I talk to you about what went on today at Stormont, you heard what Willie Thompson had to say about the Unionist Party being there at all. What's your reaction?
Well, I'm sorry that Willie has done this, and I'm sorry he didn't see fit to discuss it with myself or others beforehand. We had a very extensive consultation process within the party, and that culminated in a decision of our party executive, which displayed a remarkable unanimity. Now, Willie unfortunately wasn't there and doesn't seem to be fully aware of the thinking within the broad party on these matters.
But he says he's not a maverick. He says that there are other people who are not as vocal as him whom he represents.
We had a thorough discussion in the executive. And the executive, of course there were a variety of views, but the executive was overwhelmingly of the view that we continue as we have continued. And others in the executive have loyally abided by that.
Is there any understanding at all for that viewpoint that he has?
I think what I would say to Willie and others, and if Willie had been here in the last 10 days, in fact actually he was on a parliamentary delegation to the United States, so he's a wee bit out of touch in terms of what actually has happened.
But still,
if he had been here, and if he had seen the way in which unionism was making the agenda on the offensive, putting other people on the back foot, I think he would then realise that the last thing we want to see now is this silly, sad old story of Unionist division.
But nothing happened today that convinced him that he should change his mind, he says.
Well, I'm not sure that he's actually au fait with what happened today. And that is the important story, is actually what happened today and what will happen tomorrow and in succeeding
What
days.
do you think is going to happen? You mean you've indicted Sinn Féin. Do you think that the answer that you will get tomorrow is the one you expect?
Well, as I said, and you showed on your clip, the government is on trial too. And the government has introduced onto the table of democracy an unreconstructed group of terrorists. And the government needs to pick and choose its words very carefully, because the truth will out, and the truth of Market Hill will out. And the Secretary of State needs to take very great care on this matter. I believe that she ought to exclude them. Now, whether she does or does not, she needs to move on this very carefully, because, as I say, the truth will out, and there will be other ways and other opportunities for us to put Sinn Féin on the back foot. And, of course,
if Sinn Féin remain in, are you in as well?
We will pick and choose what we do and our tactics. We are there not to negotiate with Sinn Féin, because we don't think there's any point.
But you didn't even wait for their response today.
Well, we're not there to negotiate with them. There are
no, but
other
you didn't
parties.
even wait. No, but you made your accusations today, and you left. You didn't wait for them to answer.
We had people listening. There's no obligation on me to be personally present all the time. We had people listening.
Why not? Were you afraid of what you might have heard?
No, well, we knew that there was nothing of value was going to be heard, and neither was it. They didn't even try to answer the charges that Ken brought against them. And that's an implicit admission of guilt if there ever was one.
You obviously go back tomorrow to see what the answer is going to be. Do you stay in?
Paul, look, this process operates in a variety of ways. You have occasional plenaries, you have bilaterals. We can pick and choose the bilaterals. We can remodel the process within the existing form. We will be there to negotiate with the government, with other parties such as the SDLP, if they're prepared to get down to serious talks with us. But with regard to Sinn Féin, we don't see any point in negotiating with them until they have established a commitment to exclusively peaceful means. And that, of course, brings us back to familiar territory, on which I hope you'll see some progress within the next few days.
David Trimble, thank you.
Face-to-face at Stormont for the first time. Meanwhile, Mo Mowlam and David Trimble row over the challenge to Sinn Féin.
The people on trial today are not just Sinn Féin, but also the Labour Party and the Labour government.
And would cancer services survive a move from Beaver Park Hospital? Good evening. This afternoon, Sinn Féin and the Ulster Unionists finally came face-to-face round the negotiating table at Stormont. Television cameras were excluded from the proceedings, but Newsline's reporting team has been monitoring today's events. We now go live to Stormont and to join Conor Bradford.
Thanks very much indeed, Rose. Yes, the long-awaited showdown actually took place at around 2 o'clock this afternoon and lasted for about 2 hours. Sinn Féin call it negotiation, the Ulster Unionists call it confrontation, and indeed, top of their agenda was a bid to get Sinn Féin removed from the talks. Mo Mowlam said she'd listen to both sides of the argument, consult the other parties before arriving at any sort of decision, but for the moment anyway, the odds are definitely that Sinn Féin are here to stay. Reporting on the day's events, Keith Doyle.
When the Ulster Unionists went into Castle Buildings this afternoon, there was no repeat of last week's joint entrance with the Loyalists. An indication that scene being flanked by the PUP and the UDP was unpopular with sections of the party. Today there was a mood of history being made. This was to be the first time in 75 years that all sides were to face each other around the same table. The only item on the agenda was the Ulster Unionists' indictment of Sinn Féin. They spent almost an hour outlining their reasons why the party should be excluded.
We underlined the identity that exists between Sinn Féin and IRA, and drew attention to the presence in the plenary of the godfathers of terrorism, of the terrorism that has racked this province for the last 25 years.
Then a thinly veiled attack on the government and the Secretary of State.
The people on trial today are not just Sinn Féin, but also the Labour Party and the Labour government. That's what's on trial today, as to whether that government has any genuine commitment to democracy, and whether it's allowing itself to be gulled along
The two governments will now decide if Sinn Féin will remain in the talks. No one really expects them to be thrown out, and a decision is expected tomorrow. Staying out of the talks today, but keeping a close eye on them, was the DUP. Ian Paisley believes the Ulster Unionists are wasting their time.
They said they wouldn't sit down at a table and discuss the union. Now they've suddenly reversed that. Why have they reversed that? Because of the pressures put on them by the British government.
Late this afternoon, back at Stormont, Sinn Féin emerged from the talks after defending the indictment against them, saying they'd been witness to a sham.
This was heralded as the great confrontation, the great showdown, the great challenging of Sinn Féin. And the leaders of unionism came into the room, made a submission, and then scampered out of the room to talk to the media. And they would have served everyone well if they'd simply sent us it in a letter. They didn't just indict Sinn Féin, they indicted the new British government, the Irish government, and the SDLP. So I suppose, in trying to make sense out of all of this, we have to ask the question, does David Trimble want to make peace?
We can all do what was done today. We can all bring up litanies of the past that other parties have done. But all of that does is preserve that past. And that's a past that we all need to leave behind us and build a new future. So let's get down to that now.
The Secretary of State is said to be angry at David Trimble's attack on the government. She's expected to table a procedural motion tomorrow, which will trigger the full three-stranded talks process. However, problems remain with that, which could delay the process until next week. Keith Doyle, Newsline, Stormont.
So, as Keith says, there are plenty of comings and goings, and joining us now, our own political correspondent, Stephen Grimmerson. A very bad-tempered exchange between the Ulster Unionists and Mo Mowlam. What's behind all that exactly, Stephen?
David Trimble, as you would have heard, came out and made some fairly strident comments about the Labour government effectively being in the dock, and he also made comments about Mo Mowlam directly when he said that effectively she'd need to guard her words because they might come back to bite her. Now, later on, there was a meeting inside Castle Buildings behind us, and I think that friction came to the surface again. Now, interestingly, 2 or 3 different parties are now telling me that Mo Mowlam actually left that meeting for a while, but that's been heavily denied by the Northern Ireland office. But there's no doubt that there was a bit of a dust-up. I'm told now that it has been sorted out, that effectively things are back on track again between the two sides. But I think you can see from all of that, that sort of friction shows the sort of raw nerves that are involved on a day like this.
Is this planned strategy from the Ulster Unionists, or are they somehow regretting going in, getting cold feet, looking behind themselves at the likes of Paisley and McCartney and thinking maybe we shouldn't be here?
No, I don't think they've got cold feet about this, but I think they have to have as much cover as they possibly can for this. I don't think they have any expectation that Sinn Féin will be ejected from these talks. So then where do they go from there? They'll be here tomorrow. Sinn Féin will be here tomorrow. What they can try to do is to try and toughen up the procedural motion which triggers the three-stranded process, the full talks process. That's largely a motion which is going to be about decommissioning. They're trying to have inserted bits and pieces which they want, which are to their favour. And what they're saying is, we didn't get anything out of the Sinn Féin motion, so we want to see if we can get something from the fringes here as further cover for what we're doing.
Will both governments allow the talks process to get bogged down in procedural wrangling?
I don't think it will get bogged down in procedural wrangling, at least not for any length of time. Effectively, I think what we're looking at, the procedural motion put tomorrow and possibly voted through on Monday.
Why can't we see what's going on in there, Stephen? Why are we being kept out?
It's very simple. The two governments say this is a very tricky process. You've heard the sort of friction there was in there already. If we had television cameras in there, people would play to the galleries and we'd get nothing done. This is a process which is confidential, and that's the only way they say that it can be sorted out.
Stephen Grimmerson, thanks very much indeed. Looking back in time, the last time the leaders of republicanism and unionism met was back in the early 1920s, and until very recently it looked unlikely to happen again. Chris Capper now reports on the tortuous journey that's brought both sides back to the table 75 years on.
In 1922, James Craig, a solid unionist figure if ever there was one, met the man he knew to be behind recent IRA activity in Northern Ireland, Michael Collins.
Churchill graphically summed up their first reactions on meeting each other. He said they glowered magnificently at one another in his office in 1922. Now, you can imagine why, because here was Michael Collins, the architect of the IRA, the architect of the armed campaign against police and soldiers for the previous 5 years, confronting the architect of partition and an authentic Ulster Orange man, James Craig.
Both were pragmatic men, but their negotiations were severely limited.
You could make some kind of progress in easing the terrible situation that was going on in Belfast and Derry and other places, and at the same time, no agreement about the boundary. You couldn't expect Collins to come to much of an agreement about the boundary commission. And the border remained, of course, the essential point. This was the partition question.
The call for Unionists to talk again came with the outbreak of the Troubles and the end of Stormont. Unionists did share power with constitutional nationalists through the Sunningdale Agreement until it was wrecked by the Loyalist workers' strike. The Anglo-Irish Agreement was between two governments, sidelining the Unionist parties. And it was the Downing Street Declaration which really began the process towards all-inclusive negotiations and pressure on Unionists to talk to Sinn Féin.
You had a pincer movement. On the one hand, you had a strong British government which has dropped the decommissioning, the prior decommissioning requirement. On the other hand, you have had the beginnings of a change of heart about talking within the Protestant population. You had, first of all, the Loyalist paramilitary groups saying, yes, they favoured talking. And then you had that spreading throughout the Protestant population in general. It is now that tide in favour of talks has now reached the leadership of the Ulster Unionist Party, and they find themselves, in essence, propelled into that conference chamber.
The two governments hope more will be achieved now than in 1922. Chris Capper, Newsline.
A little look back at some of the history behind these talks, but let's get back to the modern day. And what exactly do Republicans and Nationalists want to come out of these talks? We go now to the northwest, where Kieran Turish has been canvassing a wide range of opinion.
Since 1772, the Derry Journal has been reflecting the news and opinion of Northern Ireland's second largest city. Its editor says the expectation among the general Catholic community is for definitive change. Republicans, he believes, won't compromise on their ultimate goal, but have adopted a more patient attitude.
Even the most avid Republican recognises United Ireland isn't going to happen in the morning. What I think we will be looking for is some sort of a United Ireland type agreement down the line. Now, I think what they might be going for originally is some sort of interim agreement, like a federated Ireland, or a Britless Ireland, as they would call it.
In the Bogside, the sentiments of discontent are clear, but not all Republicans see a United Ireland as an achievable short-term goal.
If the Unionists go into this phase thinking that the union isn't up for discussion, then straight away we're faced with a brick wall. Equally, I think Republicans have to go into this negotiating process with an open mind. Our ultimate goal is a United Ireland, but we have to go in listening and open.
Father Stephen McLaughlin is a 36-year-old priest who grew up in the city. He's now based in the Cregan estate. He believes most Catholics would support an interim arrangement.
They would accept that politicians will have to reach an agreement. There will have to be a compromise on all sides. That means that cherished aspirations will have to give way to reality.
These students at St Columb's College want politicians to talk and permanent peace established. The view was mixed on a united Ireland.
I think a power sharing arrangement would be the only possible outcome.
Ideally, for myself, it would be in a united Ireland, but at this present moment in time, the priority is for peace.
I wouldn't like to go from a violent Northern Ireland to a violent United Ireland, with the Protestant people of Ulster being upset and fighting maybe to go back into the Union, because it would just be a vicious circle.
Accommodating those differing aspirations remains the challenge. Kieran Turish, Newsline, Derry.